Hej! Välkomna! Så, då är vi igång. Då är vi live. Och sagt var, välkomna till en trevlig kväll med allt om whisky, Arcus, White Mackay och men framförallt då Jura Single Malt Whisky. Och med Daryl då som gäst och Head of Whisky Experience hos White Mackay och Jura. Som sagt var, vi tänkte att vi försöker hålla på i 45 minuter. Det är ju som sagt var fotboll ikväll, så att jag misstänker att annars så försvinner ni väl allihopa här om en timme ändå. Så att målet är att på 45 minuter då lära oss lite mer om Jura, lära oss lite mer om Daryl, vem han är, men framförallt också då gå igenom lite grann av Juras core range, eller grunden egentligen. Så det är 12-åringen, det är 7 Wood och 18-åringen då som vi ska prova oss igenom. Jag då och Håkan ska försöka guida igenom det här, men det är framförallt Daryl som kommer att presentera och prata. Jag är en frilansskribent på tidningen då, Allt om whisky, och det är väl framförallt så att säga som ni känner igen mig. Under den här stunden då, så har ni frågor som ni vill att jag ska svara på, så skriv i chatten och sen så kommer vi då att lägga upp dem och så försöker vi svara på dem efterhand hela tiden då. Så att, ställ frågor i chatten bara. Så, Håkan, vem är du?
Håkan Pete, som många känner mig som. Vi som älskar whisky jobbar också som frilansare åt Allt om whisky emellanåt. Så det här är ju ett sånt samarbete då, där vi har tänkt att vi ska ha lite kul helt enkelt. Online i dessa tider. Så att det här kommer att bli en trevlig kväll. Jag är helt övertygad om. Så att jag tror faktiskt att vi kör igång. And switching to English, of course. And welcome Daryl to the show.
Okay, how are you doing?
Jeez.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, same. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely.
And who are you? And who are Daryl?
Who am I? It's a very deep question. I am here over in Scotland today. I'm living in Edinburgh, so yeah, I'm joining you guys from Scotland this evening, which is fabulous. And my background, and Hakan and I, we met many years ago. On a whiskey trip. We were doing a Highland Park visit up to the beautiful Tromsø when we were doing some lovely Valhalla stuff with Highland Park many years ago. So yeah, I've worked for Diageo prior to that as well. So yeah, I'm very fortunate because I get to work with Jura and you know the other distilleries here over at White Mackay and it's the islands. I mean, when you think of Jura, you know, Skye and Orkney, these places, I think sometimes it's very easy to think that they're all quite similar, you know, because they're all Scottish islands. But you guys in Sweden will know that the different cultures that exist, the beauty of the islands, as you can see here, they change dramatically as you go around each individual island. And each island has its own personality. And these are the mighty paps of Jura, which dominate the line. And when you visit Islay, as I know that many of you Swedish whiskey lovers do, the paps are there to remind you to come and see us on Jura as well. You know, it's not all about all that smoky stuff with Lafroig, Lagavulin, Ardbeg and things like that. You know, Jura's nice too, so don't forget about us. Yeah.
Okay. But how did your interest in whiskey start? One time ago?
Well, my dad was a chef. Here and actually on the submarines, my father was a chef, so I was always very interested in flavour, and I became a bartender here in Scotland and started to work very closely with cocktails and cocktail competitions. And one of my very first cocktail competitions was a whiskey one, bizarrely. And I know that whiskey and cocktails, they're not always considered to be best friends, but I believe, you know, that whiskey can be consumed in many different ways. So through that, I ended up working with our good friends over at Diageo, and that was the start of my whiskey journey, you know. That was about 16 years ago, which is quite scary because time flies when you're having fun, and you have a lot of fun when you've got a whiskey in your hand, that's for sure. Yeah. But I mean, the special thing, I think, that doing this kind of job, the ambassadorial side, going out to different countries, and I've been over to Sweden and done many tastings for whiskey clubs, Viking line visits, you know, on trade in Sweden's fantastic as well. And it's just amazing when you go around to different countries, you see the passion for whiskey is so strong, and that thirst for knowledge and interest. That's where the big motivation comes from. Certainly for me, you know, working in the whiskey industry, that's the thing that gets me excited, is that passion as we move around different parts of the world. And it's fair to say that, you know, Sweden's definitely one of the most passionate whiskey drinking countries in the world, and now, of course, whiskey making country as well, which is super cool as well.
So, Daryl, can you tell us a little bit more about Jura Distillery and the island of Jura, actually? I mean...
Yeah. I was fascinated by Jura. When I first went to Jura for the very first time, I didn't realize just how beautiful the island is itself. These are real palm trees, I promise. If you, I can't promise you sunshine, but I can promise you palm trees. The distillery is in Craighouse, which is the capital city, if you like, of Jura. Now, keep in mind that Jura only has around 212 people that actually live there on the island. So it's very isolated, and it's a very, very small community. And you have to go back in time many years to realize the impact that this distillery has had on the island. Because if you go back to the 1800s, you would have had about 1,500 people living on Jura, many of them farmers, managing the land and you know, doing labor kind of intensive jobs. Between that time all the way through to just after the Second World War, what you see is the population decline rapidly because of the Industrial Revolution. People were moving away from rural areas and this idea of social mobility. So they went to Glasgow, Edinburgh, they went to the big cities, Liverpool, even over to America, to find, you know, a better opportunity of a better life for themselves. So the islands declined in their population, and Jura was really heavily hit by that. And the distillery itself, although it was established way back in 1810, the distillery actually closed in 1901, and it basically disappeared. And Mr. Ferguson was the guy who was running the distillery at the time. He went back to Glasgow once the distillery closed, and the buildings fell apart. And it wasn't really until 1959 when a group of guys got together who had a plan to bring a good economic situation back to Jura. So they started to plan the reopening of the Jura distillery. And it's interesting because this distillery, although Jura is the name of the island and the name of the distillery back in the 1800s was known as the Small Isles Distillery. It wasn't really known as the Jura Distillery back then. So it's had a fascinating history. I'm sure the stuff in the 1800s, with the distillery closing in 1901, would have been a smoky style of whiskey. But the industry had changed so much by the 1960s, because you guys enjoy great blended whiskey where you are. The blends of the day in the 1960s, the palate had changed. People wanted light, fresh whiskies, great for highballs, you know, that kind of style. So Cutty Sark, J&B, those styles of whiskies became very, very popular in the 60s and the 70s. And even if you think about the malt whiskies, because malt whiskey was not, it's not what it is today. You know, it wasn't widely available. The first whiskies to be available really outside of Scotland, single malt whiskies, would have been Glen Grant in Italy through a man called Mr. Giovanetti, who was bringing Glen Grant over to Italy in 1960. And then probably Glenfiddich in 1963. So very light style single malt. So you can see the kind of palate style. So when this distillery reopened, the distillery reopened with bigger stills than ever would have had before. Very big, tall stills, very broad around the neck. And these are perfect for creating a light spirit, because at this time, Jura would have been supplying the blenders, their beautiful malt whiskies. So there's a quick snapshot of, I guess, the trials and tribulations of the distilling on Jura. And the great news is today, you know, we have 212 people who are living on the island, you know, and that's what sustains, you know, this economy. So Jura is a very, very special place, and the distillery is a massive part of the community. Now, there are many other things happening on Jura. The hotel, of course, we have one hotel which has the pub, which is this building you can see just on the left-hand side. Now, you have to be very well behaved in this pub, because if you get kicked out, there's not another pub to go to. So you have to watch what you're doing, you know. And I think this is a great point, you know, just as we sit and look at this distillery and talk about the style of whiskey that comes from Jura, let's look at the 12-year-old guys and have a little talk through what it is that Jura's trying to create, because this setup in the still house, tall stills, very light, very fresh style of spirit. This whiskey goes into bourbon casks first. And then what we do is for about 18 months, is we put this whiskey into some lovely Oloroso sherry casks. And that brings a nice complexity, a depth of flavour, a nice sweetness also to the whiskey. And the 12-year-old, I always love, because I think it's very versatile. You know, it's great, neat, it's great with a splash of water, have it with some food, have it in a cocktail. It has lots and lots of character, this whiskey. A lovely chocolate nose on the nose. Nice spicy notes coming through. That lovely orange zest that just jumps out of Jura for me. Really, really pleasant. And then have a wee taste, have a sip. Cheers, Skull. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Nice and sweet to begin with. Quite soft around the sides. Lots of vanilla, lots of apricot. And then a little hint of spice just at the back. A little bit of licorice, maybe some cinnamon. And what I love to do with the 12...
Also, I would say, yeah.
What was that?
Sorry, I just found some gentle pepper in it also.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good for you guys to know how we make this whiskey. So for around 3 weeks of the year, we do run a peated malt program through the distillery, and we mature that whiskey separately. So when we're choosing the casks and we're bringing them together, what we do is we bring in a little bit, just a tiny bit of some of that peated stock. And we almost use that as a kind of salt and pepper, like a seasoning, just to give you that little bit extra pepper, spice, dark chocolate, even roasted coffee. Those kind of aromas really come through quite nicely. So as part of the whiskey making process, we are bringing in just a tiny touch of that smoky whiskey that we produce. So yeah. And because of the sherry cask influence, what I like to do is I like food with whiskey, and most people do. And I know you guys like smoked flavors and things like that. But what I've done is I've got some nice chorizo, and this cheese here is called Old Reekie, which is an Edinburgh-based smoked cheese. So you get that combination of fat from the meat, fat from the cheese, a little bit of smoke and a little bit of spice coming through in the sausage. That's a really nice pairing, I think, for the Jura 12. And something, if you have some at home, give it a little bash. I'm sorry, guys, I'm making you jealous by eating in front of me. Apologies.
It's okay.
But it works so well. Good. So there's a nice introduction to the Jura house style. And
would you say it's the typical Jura to a 12-year?
I would say the 10 is the typical Jura, but the 12's a bit older. It's a bit heavier than the 10, probably. Yeah. Okay. So the 10 is definitely the most typical, I would say, of the Juras, but the 12 a little bit richer, a little bit heavier.
Yeah, and I can also tell the people out there at you can the 12-year-old you can actually order at Systembolaget, but the 350 milliliter bottle, small bottle, is more or less in every store at Systembolaget, over 400 stores. So But if you would like to have the 700 milliliter bottle, you need to order it, so to speak.
Excellent. Yeah. As some of you might know from years ago, the Jura Origin 10-year-old, Superstition, and Prophecy. And this range, the Signature Series, this came in about 4 years ago and replaced those whiskies. So we don't make the Jura Origin, Prophecy. The Jura XO, which was the 16-year-old, was in there as well. Those are gone. And it's these whiskies that have come in and replaced those.
It's interesting because you still, I mean, as you said, I mean, it's a, I mean, the new core range. I mean, you often say like Jura's new core range, but it's, I mean, it's not new anymore. I mean, they've been there for
4 years.
4 years now, yeah.
Yeah, 4 years. I mean, it's funny because it's not new, but it still feels quite new in some ways because some people haven't maybe tried it yet because they had some Superstition or Prophecy left at home or whatever. So yeah, I mean, 4 years it's a long time in our life. In whiskey, it's not so long, I suppose.
No.
Yeah. So nice start with the 12-year-old. Did you guys enjoy that whiskey?
Perfect. Yeah. I also get a nuttiness, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. There is a slight savoury note, and I would say it's coming from the sherry cask. It's a lovely. Oh, good noise! You hear that? Yeah.
Great noise.
There's a nice nutty note, and it's interesting because when we move on and get towards the Jura 7 wood, we're actually going to move towards a much lighter and more delicate style of whiskey here. And I think what's cool about the 7 wood is I talk about the 12 and the 18 as almost like their brother and sister, you know, and they grew up in the same home and nurtured in the same way, and they feel very close to one another in terms of their style. I always say the 7 wood is more like a cousin, you know, who grew up across the street from a different family. They're related, but they seem different. And I always think with the 7 wood, because it's a bit drier and it's a bit cleaner in its style, it's maybe a bit more refined, you know. So maybe maybe their family had more money than the 12 and 18-year-old family, you know, because it's very soft. I don't know what you guys are getting on the nose, but it is quite soft. It's got lots of white chocolate coming through, soft spice, a little bit of tropical fruit. You don't get the tropical fruit necessarily in the 12-year-old, and you don't get that white chocolate in the 12-year-old either. That's just not there. It's slightly higher strength, so we're up at 42% for this whiskey as well. And this whiskey spends the first part of its life in bourbon casks, ex-bourbon casks. So you start to build up these vanillas, oranges, a little bit of soft spice. And then what we do is we go out into 6 different types of French oak. And these French oak casks are coming from all over France. And some of you will know this from cognac. You know, you have your Tronchet, your Limousin, and the Limousin brings lots of spicy notes like cloves and cinnamons. Tronchet is a bit more buttery, a bit more almost patisserie kind of style, quite creamy. And then even Allier, which is up in the northeast, you get some of these tropical fruit notes. So each of these different casks from around France bring a different flavor really to the party. And they do combine to create something that is quite elegant. And I really do find that it's really soft and elegant and subtle, really subtle. But when you taste it, let that texture roll around, get the chocolates, the vanillas and the butters and all these types of things going on. It is really good. But I'm going to add a little splash of water because I do think this whiskey does really, really well with a little splash of water. And you get a little bit more of that tropical fruit note coming through. That's just normal water. It's not fizzy. It's a lark fire from up in the Isle of Lewis. So they give you this really clean, clear water.
I have a thought. Do you mature all whiskey on Jura or someplace else?
Yeah. So we do. We mature. Most of our whiskey is on Jura. Yeah.
Okay.
Some of it's not. Most distilleries have to have a certain amount off-site. I think a lot of that's for insurance purposes, to be honest. Because if the distillery burns down, you'll have some whiskey left. It makes sense to me. But where we do the finishing, the movement from bourbon into sherry or from bourbon into these 6 different French oak casks, we do that in Invergordon, the northeast of Scotland, because that's where we have the vat vessels and things like that to be able to move whiskey around in that way. So yeah, at the distillery just now, there'll probably be about 35,000 casks on site just now. It's not a big distillery, Jura. I think I don't know what the perception is in Sweden of the size of the brand or the distillery of Jura, but it's about 2.2 million litres a year. So, it's relatively small in terms of production output.
In Scottish way, it's small, but in a Swedish whiskey world, then it's big.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's all about perspective, exactly.
Yeah.
And so what you see there, the stillhouse image is beautiful because what you see is the lovely lamp glass shaped stills, and they have that nice tight waist, and then they go right back up into the neck of the still. So you're going to get lots and lots and lots of copper contact here. And also you can see the line arms are pretty straight. So you're looking for those vapors to pass over as vapors rather than dribbling down on the angle. So, looking for a very light spirit here, very clean, quite grassy, quite lemony. So yeah, really, really beautiful stillhouse when you go in there. I think Jura has the 3rd largest in terms of height stills in the industry. Glenmorangie are number 1, and I think Caolila are just a touch taller than these stills here on Jura, and then it's Jura. So it's quite a nice light, clean spirit, and you can see that in the 7-wood. I don't know if you can notice that, but it's quite subtle, this whiskey, as I say. What I like to do with this whiskey, and it's a tradition here in Scotland, and I'm sure you do it in Sweden, is what we call the half and half. As a young boy, I grew up in Fife, just north of Edinburgh, where the Cameron Bridge distillery is, quite near there. And we used to go play football around, and my granddad or my dad or whoever it was would come, and they would get fed up of watching the football because we weren't very good. And you'd find them in the pub, after the game. They probably left at half time, didn't want to waste the time watching us running around. And you would always find them with a little glass of whiskey and a small beer. And it would have been a blend, a famous grouse, a white Mackay or a Bell's. And it really depended on where you lived, what brand it was, that was available in that area. And it would have been a beer, like a dark beer, an 80 shilling type of beer, that style. But these days it's great because you've got so many options within malt whiskey. But now you also have so many options within the craft beer movement as well. So what I like to do with the 7-wood is pair it with a really nice, very kind of high in hops IPA or a Hefeweizen. And that works really, really nicely as a partner for your Jura 7-wood. Really, really good.
Well, that's nice. That's nice.
Mm.
So the 7-wood, I mean, do you know more about the red wine casks?
It's interesting. We always think when we say French oak, it must have come from a winery.
Yeah.
There is no wine in these casks before we use.
Okay. Yeah.
So they're what we call virgin oak, but we do use them again. So they're not technically virgin oak every single time we use these French oak casks. So when we used them for the very first time, they were very fresh, but we can reuse them because we're only looking for that finishing time for around a year, up to 18 months. So there's still plenty of life left in these woods to keep adding, extras. And every batch is slightly different because the casks, as you know, that they're like people. They don't always perform exactly how you think they're going to perform. sometimes they give you more spice, sometimes they give you more fruit. So you always have to kind of play around and tweak the recipe slightly. So that's the approach really for 7-wood, which is quite labor intensive. It's quite hard work. And it is a nice, tasty whiskey with lots of these little subtle flavors, which are all contributed to by these different types of French oak. So yeah, no wineries. Great question. But yes, sadly, no wine, so I can't give you any more information on the wine.
I understand that.
Yeah. It's gone down really well. It's one of those, I think people are quite intrigued by the 7-wood. Just why 7? Where did that come from? And I think it was quite experimental. We used to have a range of whiskies on Jura called the Tastival. So if you've ever been over for Följ Isle, the Islay Whisky Festival, the Tastival bottlings that Jura used to release, this was the there was a whiskey we released in 2014 or 15, I think it was, maybe, that had 4 different French oak casks in there. And it was kind of an early trial for what became the Jura 7-wood. So it didn't just arrive from nowhere. It was kind of in the pipeline for a little while, and there was a bit of experimentation going on through the Tastival bottlings, which is what led to this product. So yeah, it's quite an interesting one.
Do you have some other different types of casks also in your warehouses? I mean, that we will see in the future, or?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I think I've got one here. Yeah, I do. We do these Distillery exclusive bottlings. Here we go. You see the Distillery cask. And that's only available at the distillery. And each year we do a different version. And last year we did something really fun. We did a fully peated, fully matured in a sherry butt Jura. And it's what that is. It's absolutely huge, flavor-wise, huge. And it's just different. I hadn't tried a whiskey like that from Jura before, and I really did like it. And it's not really a Jura style whiskey. It's too dirty and heavy, really, for a Jura. But it was nice to try. It's almost like your favorite pop band, playing a heavy metal tune. That's kind of what it was like. It's so different. But I really, really did appreciate it. So at the distillery, we've got some things like that going on that we can pull out. There was a whiskey that we released. I don't know if it went to Sweden, the 212. It was a limited edition. And that had a Chinkopin oak cask, which was really, really nice, because Chinkopin oak is often referred to as sweet oak. So it has got lots of these lovely lemon drizzle cake, lemony bonbons, toffees, these types of flavors and characters. And that whiskey was an absolute blockbuster, and very true to the Jura House style, but really different to any of the Juras I had tried before. So the Chinkopin oak was really nice. Yeah, we've got some experiments as well going on in the warehouses as well. So yeah, there'll be some cool new stuff coming out. And in the UK, just last week, we launched a rum cask as well, which was quite cool. And it was I don't think it's got an age statement on it. It's a non-age statement whiskey, but it's got about a year finish in the rum cask, and this like the banana bread and the ginger notes and things that come through do work really, really nicely. So yeah, there's some interesting things. So rum casks, fully peated stuff. So lots of different types of oak going on. Red wines as well. We've got a couple of. We're going to talk about a red wine in a second with the 18-year-old. Yeah. So yeah, lots of nice, interesting casks for sure.
That sounds really interesting, and I'm looking forward to the future then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Jonas, have you been to Jura before?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. And how can you been?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, you should come back. We've
as soon as possible.
Yeah, we built a bar in the cooperage. Which I'd love to show you. Yeah, it's really cool. It's it was a space that wasn't really used, and I felt that if we're going to look after people properly and do nice tastings and things like that, we should build a bar. So we built one about 2 years ago, and it's really good fun, really good fun. It gets quite cold at night because it is in the old cooperage, so it's basically just an old distillery warehouse building, really. But it's a brilliant place to have a few drams and see what happens. Yeah. And you can't get kicked out of that bar, which is good.
I was many moons ago since I was visiting Jura, so yeah, that's definitely on the what you call it, bucket list. Do it again.
Yeah, it's funny because it's often. I'm just going to show you something. Here it is. I don't know if you know of this guy, George Orwell, and the book 1984. And Jura itself is a big island. You know, it's about 40 miles long. For such a big island with such a small population, you know, it shows you how mountainous most of the island is. And it's very wild. And we have many beautiful deer on the island. And actually, that's where the name Jura comes from. It's Old Norse for Deer Island. That's where the language is, the influence is coming from. So, and as you know, that our dear friends from the Nordics, the Vikings, they were very familiar with the Western Isles of Scotland, and our ancestry is always going to be linked to those guys. But Jura itself, because of the size of the island, it's a great place to come and write. It's a great place to come and express your artistic sort of flair. If you're a painter or a photographer, anything like that, you know, it's absolutely perfect. But George Orwell, he came to the island and lived for about 1.5 years at the very top of the island on the estate called Barn Hill. And that's where he finished writing in 1984, all those years ago in the 1940s. So you can still visit that house today. So the next time you come back, if you haven't been before, we'll take a trek right up to the north part of the island. It's really hard to get to. And George Orwell said that Jura was the most unget-atable place in the world. You know, so that's quite fun that he had, you know. Yeah, exactly.
So sorry for interrupting, but I mean, Bengt is asking a question. Which Jura is most likely the prophecy?
There isn't one really, apart from these distillery exclusives, to be honest, because we don't have that big smoke coming through in any of these whiskies that we're tasting. So Prophecy was heavily peated. You know, it was a big smoky guy. So yeah, there isn't really one that's like a like for like. But Prophecy had a nice sherry influence. So if you like that style, that sherry influence, then probably the 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any plans for doing a smoky one, peated one again? Do you know?
Maybe. Yeah. It's a hard one because I think so, because some of the guys that really enjoy smoky whiskies, especially our friends that visit us from Islay, we should always have something there, shouldn't we? So yeah, you never know. It's not my decision, I have to say. It's definitely not my decision. Yeah. Emma, that's a great point. It's funny. I don't know if how do you know this? I've actually got some chocolate here to go with the 18-year-old. So
let's try the 18 then.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Let's try the 18-year-old then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. The 18 is a very, very tasty whiskey, and I also think it's at a really good price, to be honest, for an 18-year-old of this quality. So we are up at 44%. We have a big influence of bourbon, which over this period of time starts to go quite fudgy. So lots of almost like condensed milk, sugars, milk chocolates, and then quite spongy, like a cake-like flavor. It's a bit creamy and things. But then what we do is we overlay some lovely red wine casks. And these are from Bordeaux. Beautiful red wine casks, bringing together this element of spice, but more so fruit. You know, a little bit of dark chocolate, a little bit of cinnamon, and then lots of like blackberry and raspberry coming through. So delicious. So what I've done is I've chosen a chocolate that has a nice hazelnut element to it. It's 70% cocoa, so it's higher cocoa content chocolate with that little bit of hazelnut and a little touch of salt. And that chocolate is absolutely delicious with the Jura 18. So Emma, I hope that answers your question. I don't know what brands you can get your hands on there in Sweden, so I'm sure there is one that has those combinations of flavors. So big bit of chocolate, let that melt in your mouth, and then let that whiskey just develop on the palate. Let that dark chocolate come out. Let these berry notes come through in the chocolate, and let it just softly, softly move away. But because of the higher alcohol, just at 44, which I probably between 44 and 48% seem to be my preference for whiskey drinking, you get that nice finish, a nice medium to long finish on the Jura 18. How did you guys find that?
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
I love the sweetness in the nose.
It's got that honey, you know, maple syrup. Yeah.
Some butter in the taste that's really, really nice.
Yeah. A little bit too easy drinking sometimes.
Yeah.
Definitely chocolate. Definitely chocolate, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the 18, it'll be about 18 months in the red wine casks as well. So I think it's it's a good expression. And like I say, when you enjoy the 12, you can see the relationship between the 12 and the 18. The 7-wood is lighter out of the 3 between as you go from one to the next, 2 to the next. I always find the 18 is a great digestif whiskey. I like coffee. I like quite strong coffee at the end of a nice meal or something like that, and a nice piece of chocolate, a little bit of the whiskey, and a little coffee just to go back and forward is really, really pleasant.
Do I remember correctly if I'm saying in the core range, I mean the 12, the 10, 18, and 7-wood, there's a slightly peaty whiskey in all of them.
A little bit, absolutely, just a touch. Yes. And like I say, it's almost like cooking a steak. When you have it on the griddle, you're cooking away, and then just a little bit of salt and pepper at the end, just to bring out these flavors. So very subtle. Yeah.
Yeah. So I always know that people in Sweden in general, I mean, we're peated whiskey drinkers in general in the Nordic countries. So at what ppm do you produce?
I knew you would ask me that. I knew it.
And I know everybody's waiting for that answer. So
yeah, I know everyone's going to be like, my Wi-Fi is going to go, and you're never going to get it. No, in the glass in the end, it would be, let's say Talisker would be 15, probably, maybe 20, somewhere around there. You'd come down to, say, Highland Park, maybe between 4 and 6, something like that. And then under that, you would have Jura. It's 2 to 4, probably, even less. You know, it's just subtle. Yeah.
And the peated whiskey you produce, when you produce it, I guess you measure the ppm at before you start production. So at what level do you start at? You know that?
Yeah, absolutely. So remember, it's 3 weeks of the year we run the peated malt through the distillery, and that malt will be about 40 to 45 ppm.
Okay.
Yeah, the stuff that's not peated, we don't peat it. So That's the difference. And as I say, it's not as easy as that, because what we're not doing is we're not blending the malt, peated and unpeated, in the mill, and then mashing and then distilling, etc. What we are doing is we're doing that separately all the way through the production process, maturing those whiskies separately, and then bringing those whiskies out of the cask and just using them in small amounts at the end of the production process. So it's quite interesting, because a lot of different distilleries do it in slightly different ways. Highland Park, they blend in the mill, the peated malt and the unpeated malt, so that everything is there, the same peated level all the way through pretty much. Other distilleries will have different ways of doing it as well. So that's just the way that we've done it on Jura, and it seems to work. And I personally prefer it in this style. I don't think Jura should be heavily peated.
No.
It should be a lighter style, because of the purpose of why the distillery was brought back in the 60s. It was to bring a lighter, almost Highland style to the islands, to allow it to be successful. So we stay true to that a little bit. And every now and then, we can nod our hat to the whiskies that were produced on Jura back in the 1800s, when this distillery was known as the Small Isles Distillery. So it's a really pleasant flavour profile, and I think through these three whiskies you see a decent range of flavours, from bourbon and sherry with the 12, the French oak coming through from the 7 wood, and the red wine finish in the 18-year-old. Now, have you guys got a football match on tonight or something? What's the?
It starts in about 17 minutes or something. Yeah. So.
Yeah. We also do here. We also do.
It's not a big game, but the big thing is that Zlatan is coming back. He's doing comeback in the national team. So that's the big thing.
Amazing. Yeah. Brilliant.
Are there any questions out there, Jeroen, or should we round this up a little bit? I have a final question for you. If there's no more questions out there, do you have any secret releases going on that you can reveal for us tonight, or hint? Give us a hint.
Yes, absolutely. Well, last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, we launched a 1989 vintage, which was a really beautiful whiskey. I had a bottle here, and I drank it with my father-in-law. Actually, it was delicious, really, really good, and I'm hopeful that he now likes me. But it's always the challenge with the father-in-law. But we have another couple of vintages coming out, which are really cool, really, really tasty whiskies as well. They're coming out shortly. So keep your eyes peeled for those, and they're going to be very, very good whiskies.
Hope we see them in Sweden.
I hope so. The great thing in Sweden is we know they're appreciated in Sweden because of your whiskey culture. But yeah, absolutely. I hope so too. Yeah.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Perfect. Well, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure to join you for a few whiskies. And Håkan, it's been too long.
Yeah, it sure has.
We must grab a whiskey soon. Yeah.
Looking forward that me and Håkan will
come over.
Come over.
Well, if you're ever over in Edinburgh or on the Western Islands, always let us know. Make sure you do, and likewise, I'm sure I'll be in Sweden soon. So,
we hope to see you. Perfect.
Yeah, I guess you will be over, but I guess we don't know when, but because of the
who knows? Yeah. Hopefully before the end of the year. That would be nice.
Yeah. Sweden have a few bottles of vintage 1997 left. Great news.
Fabulous. There we are. Thank you, Martina. Excellent. Slangen, good luck tonight with Zlatan's return. I hope it all goes well.
And Thank you, Daryl, for a lovely presentation, and it's always a pleasure to listen to you. And thank you, and Jura, of course, Arcus for arranging this, and yes, have a lovely evening, and sláinte.
Lunch.
Sláinte, skål.
Skål.
Skål.